My father adopted 3 girls to protect our legacy, but none of them ever looked me in the eye, especially Mary. They say the Hale family bloodline is cursed, 18 generations and never more than 1 heir per line. My grandfather lost 2 brothers to sickness. My great-grandfather survived a fire that took every cousin, and now, with my father aging and no uncles, no brothers, no sons but me, the weight of the Hale name sits squarely on my shoulders. 1 heir, 1 child, 1 future. That was the rule written not in ink, but in graves. I was 12 when my father sat me down and said, "If we can't find love, we'll build loyalty." That's the day he brought Mary, Sarah, and Elise into our home. 3 orphaned girls, all without ties, all adopted under the Hale estate, raised as sisters, groomed as potential wives. I was raised alongside them, but never with them. They whispered when I entered a room, smiled with polite emptiness, laughed too loud at each other's jokes, and fell silent at mine. My father hoped time would breed attachment, maybe affection, but affection was never the currency in this house, only usefulness. By 27, I'd inherited every branch of the Hale conglomerate. Shareholders watched me with sharp eyes, board members waited for me to fail, and my father, he waited for a grandchild. "Whichever of the 3 gives you a child," he said, "will inherit alongside you, the rest will leave quietly." He said it gently, but there was steel behind it. They knew, we all did. But none of them ever looked at me like a man, not once, not Mary, not Sarah, not Elise, not until I saw Mary behind the rose trellis one evening, her fingers clutching George's shirt like she couldn't bear to let him go. George, the driver's son, brought in after a layoff, quiet and eager, always bowing too low. I hadn't paid him much mind, but that night, I did. I stood behind that dimmed shadows, frozen, watching her tilt her head toward him like she'd done for no one else. Watching her lips curve not with disdain, not with tolerance, but with warmth. She cupped his jaw in her hands. "Once I give birth to the Hale heir," she whispered, "I'll divorce him and marry you." George flinched. "What if he finds out?" "He won't," she said sweetly. "He's too proud to ask questions, and once the baby's born, his father will secure my position. He won't dare push me away." I didn't move, I didn't breathe. The words struck harder than any boardroom betrayal. I thought, stupidly, that Mary's coldness was just habit, that she didn't know how to love anyone. But she did. Just not me. She never did. I walked away without a sound. Returned to the main hall where the lights were soft and golden, where my father sat with a glass of aged whiskey, papers before him, and a quiet smile on his lips. He looked up at me, pleased. "You've had enough time to decide," he said. "So David, which one will you marry?" I smiled. I've always been calm, that's what the world sees. Calm in boardrooms, calm during crises, calm even when my mother's coffin was lowered into the ground, and my father patted my 10-year-old shoulder like that made me a man. They called it strength, stoicism, I called it surviving. No one ever asked what it cost. My father raised me on expectations, not affection. By the time I was 15, I had memorized every Hale asset. By 18, I was shadowing mergers. By 22, I was CEO in all but name. But no matter how many empires I built for him, he never looked at me the way he looked at her. Mary. She was the oldest of the adopted 3, brought into the house the same year I passed my entrance exam to Yale. She was 15 then, with ice in her posture and poise in her smile, camera perfect, elegant. Every photo of the Hale household showed her to my right. Every charity dinner had her on my arm. The world assumed we were in love. My father hoped we'd marry, but Mary never looked at me the way she looked at the lens. She was polite, always. Never affectionate, never cruel, just perfectly distant, like she was playing a role she didn't quite care for. I was kind to her. I gave her space. I left gifts in her room without ever signing my name. A rare first edition novel when she started her literature major, a bracelet carved from mother of pearl on her birthday. Never once did she acknowledge them, not with a word, not with a glance. Still, I watched her from a distance, fool that I was. I mistook her grace for shyness, her silence for mystery. I told myself she just needed time to feel at home, to feel safe. After all, she'd lost her parents young, she'd grown up hard, just like me. Then there was Sarah, second in age, blunt where Mary was composed, loud where Mary was poised. She laughed too easily, gossiped too much, and had a mouth that rarely stopped moving. But Her loyalty to Mary was unshakable. She followed her like a shadow, quick to defend her, quick to mock anyone who didn't see the world the way Mary did, including me. I remember once, during a foundation dinner, a guest mistook Sarah for my fiancée. She laughed so hard she spilled wine on the tablecloth and said, "Please, David, he's like a wall dressed in suits, no thanks." It didn't sting, not then. I'd grown used to being the outsider in my own home. The third girl, Elise, was quieter, less cruel perhaps. But her silence made her complicit. She laughed when Sarah did. She followed Mary's lead without question. 3 girls raised under my roof, fed by my family's name, living in rooms I designed, speaking in tones like I was a stranger eating at their table. And George. He arrived 5 years ago, the son of a retired driver. My father gave him a job out of charity, a humble assistant, quietly folding napkins at banquets, driving Sarah to her piano lessons, carrying Mary's shopping bags. He never said much. Always bowed low. Always smiled meekly. But I saw him. I saw the flicker in his eyes when he watched Mary walk across the marble floor. I saw the way he hovered in doorways when she was in a room. I caught the edge of his smirk once when she ignored my goodnight greeting. People called him harmless, I called him calculating. He was never meant to be anything, just a boy with calloused hands and worn shoes. But somewhere along the line, he found his way into their favor, into their whispers, into their trust. I saw him once sharing coffee with Sarah on the balcony, another time sneaking into Mary's study with an envelope she hadn't wanted the housekeeper to see. They spoke of him like a brother, but I saw the hunger in his eyes, the ambition, he wanted more. Still, I said nothing. My father barely acknowledged him. I thought that would be enough. I thought proximity meant nothing if the bloodline stayed clear. But then I overheard Mary in the garden, her hands on George's chest, her whisper curling around the night air like poison. "Once I give birth to the Hale heir, I'll divorce him and marry you." That was when everything shattered. I hadn't confronted them, I hadn't exposed her, I hadn't burned down the illusion, not yet. I needed time, strategy, control. 3 nights later we had our monthly family dinner, long mahogany table, crystal glasses, my father at the head, scanning quarterly projections between bites, Mary on his right, Sarah and Elise opposite, George stood in the background, silent, hands folded. The conversation turned as always to succession. "It's time," my father said, swirling the wine in his glass. "The press is asking. The board is watching. Which of the girls will be your wife?" Mary looked up then, ever so slightly. I met her eyes for the first time since that night. She didn't flinch, neither did I. I set down my fork with measured calm and wiped the corners of my mouth. None of them. A beat of silence. "I've decided to marry Laura from City A," I continued, "the heiress of the Wyndham Group." Sarah scoffed before she could stop herself. Elise dropped her fork. My father narrowed his eyes. "Laura, the one in the chair?" "Yes," I said, pouring myself another glass of wine. "The one everyone underestimates." Mary's spoon paused mid-air, her expression unreadable. "She may be paralyzed," I continued softly, "but she's also the sole heir of one of the most powerful conglomerates in the region, and unlike the women in this house, she's never lied to me." George shifted behind us. I didn't look at him. My father said nothing, but his fingers tightened around the stem of his glass. The girls didn't speak either. The silas end stretched until it felt like a noose. I smiled, slowly. "Prepare the engagement notice," I said. "It's time the world saw who really belongs by my side." Mary didn't speak immediately. She kept her gaze steady, jaw tight, lashes lowered just enough to seem unaffected. But I knew her tells. The way her left thumb rubbed over her ring finger, the slight tension in her neck, fury, barely leashed. "You're making decisions out of spite," she said finally, her voice composed but cold. "This isn't about business, David. This is personal. You're trying to punish us, me." I didn't answer. I just swirled the wine in my glass. "Don't ruin everyone's lives just to prove a point," she continued. "We've lived together for over a decade. You know us better than anyone, and now you're going to throw that away for someone you barely know?" Sarah leaned forward. "He's not marrying Laura because he loves her. He's doing it to hurt you, Mary." I looked between them slowly. I'm marrying Laura because I've had enough of pretending. Sarah rolled her eyes. Right. And it's a coincidence she just happens to be from one of the most powerful families in the country. Elise, Mary said quietly, get George. I already knew what was coming. The banquet hall was opulent, my father's favorite display of legacy. Crystal chandeliers, gold-plated dining sets, an imported pianist playing in the far corner. The guests were hand-picked, shareholders, board directors, rival families, and the press. My birthday banquet wasn't just a celebration, it was a stage. And they were about to turn it into a trap. George entered through the side corridor, clothes slightly wrinkled, hair disheveled. He looked around nervously, then zeroed in on me. His eyes widened like he hadn't expected to see me so calm. He walked slowly into the room like a wounded dog. A whisper passed through the crowd. Cameras turned. Mary rose from her seat. I didn't want to bring this up today, she said, voice trembling just enough, but I can't stay silent anymore. She reached for George's hand and held it like he was fragile. David had him kidnapped. Gasps. Sarah added immediately, it's true, George's face was bruised. He was dragged from the gate and locked in some shed for hours. Elise chimed in, perfectly timed. We couldn't find him for half the day. He came back shaking, bleeding. My fingers tightened around my glass. George kept his eyes low, but his voice cracked, rehearsed just enough to sound real. I didn't want to say anything. I thought maybe young master was just upset, that maybe I'd done something wrong, but he told me I should remember my place, that Mary would never love someone like me. The guests murmured louder now. A few turned their faces away, unwilling to look at me. My father's lips pressed into a thin line, watching. Then Sarah stepped forward and slapped me. The sound cracked like a whip. I barely moved. You think just because you're a Hale, you can do anything to anyone? She spat. This isn't some medieval dynasty. You don't own people. I glanced around. No one came to my defense, not even my father. Mary's voice trembled again. You've been cold to us for years, but this is cruel. She looked at the cameras, then at the guests. We've tried to support him, tried to help him carry the weight of this family, and this is how he repays us? I stepped forward slowly. My cheek burned, my pride didn't. I see, I said quietly. They watched, waiting for me to break. I looked toward the screen behind the dining table and gave my assistant a small nod. The pianist stopped playing. The screen came to life with a single image, Laura. There was an audible shift in the room. She stood tall, poised, seated in a sleek wheelchair, a bouquet of imported Bulgarian roses in her lap. The wind tousled her silver blue gown. Her gaze was regal, distant. The guests gasped. Someone whispered, "Isn't that Laura Wyndham?" "Yes," I said aloud, turning back to the room, the only daughter of the Wyndham family, and my fiancée. For a moment, no one said anything. Then Mary's laugh cut the air. High, brittle. "You're serious?" she asked, almost breathless. "You're really going through with this farce?" Sarah recovered fast. "You're marrying her out of spite." "She can't even walk," Elise added, frowning. "You're doing this to make a statement." Mary stepped forward. "David, this won't fix anything. Marrying a cripple out of anger won't heal your ego." I looked at her. "No," I said, "but it will heal the Hale family." And then I smiled. The message came in as I stood at the edge of the banquet hall, glass in hand, watching the crowd devour the story the girls had served them. "Mary, apologize to George and I'll agree to marry you. Don't ruin your future over this tantrum." "No, hello, no, are you okay?" Just a threat disguised as mercy, a command laced with condescension. She still believed this was about her, that everything revolved around whether or not I earned her acceptance. I didn't reply. I pressed my thumb to the screen, hovered for a second, then deleted the message and blocked her number. Across the room, the three of them laughed as though nothing had happened. Sarah threw her head back theatrically, her voice rising above the music as if she owned the night. Elise leaned into a cluster of directors, whispering with a knowing smirk. Mary moved like she was hostess of the evening, nodding gracefully as guests praised her dress, her poise, her silence under pressure. No one looked at me. No one asked my side. They didn't see the man who bled to keep this family name clean. They saw a scandal, a threat to avoid, a loose air unraveling in real time. Was I really the heir, or just a donor with a family name? My father hadn't spoken since the slap. He stood by the wine table, arms crossed, eyes tracking me like he wasn't sure whether I was salvageable or already a disappointment too costly to fix. I was about to leave, to step out of the glare and let them win this round, if only to breathe. Then the hum began, distant, but growing. The chandeliers trembled slightly as the sound thickened, and a gust of wind rushed through the open garden doors. Guests looked up, confused. Cameras turned toward the sky. Helicopter blades. Then, rose petals. Thousands of them, soft and blushing, raining down in delicate swirls of pink and cream. They floated through the night like a storm of spring. The crowd gasped as the aircraft descended. Security rushed to form a line, but they were too late, the moment had already taken over. From the side platform, a sleek black ramp extended, and down it came Laura. Seated in her wheelchair, back straight, a velvet gown spilling over the wheels like it was poured from the sky. Her hair was swept into a loose knot, adorned with diamond pins that glittered against the fading light. She held a bouquet of the same roses falling from above, lips curved in a faint smile, as if none of this had required effort. A hush fell over the crowd, even Sarah stopped mid-laugh. Laura's assistant wheeled her toward the center of the hall, where the spotlight shifted with seamless grace. She turned her head and met my eyes without hesitation. "Forgive me for the delay," she said, her voice calm and clear. "I believe I missed the toast." No one breathed. I stepped forward, instinct overriding everything. "Laura." "I wasn't sure whether to come," she continued, not taking her eyes off me. "But then I thought, how could the bride-to-be miss her fiancé's birthday banquet?" Gasps, a camera flash, then 2, then 50. Mary's face froze in perfect stillness. Sarah looked toward the entrance, as if searching for someone to confirm this was a joke. George stood behind them, his lips parted, his expression unreadable. Laura smiled at me again and held out the bouquet. "Happy birthday, David." I took the flowers. The silence broke like glass, voices erupted, phones lifted, journalists snapped to attention, and yet all I could do was stare at the woman in front of me. She was everything the world said she wasn't: controlled, confident, powerful, every bit the heiress she was born to be, and nothing like the rumors. For a moment, I forgot the others. The sting on my cheek, the betrayal behind the garden wall, the pitying looks and smug dismissals. For a moment, I saw the Haade, a future I could have had if I had never met Mary. Never let myself fall into the illusion of her. But even then, something deep inside me tensed. Was Laura genuine, or just another player in this game, better dressed, better spoken, but playing nonetheless? I watched her eyes. They didn't dart, they didn't calculate. She looked at me the way no one else had, not like I was broken, not like I was dangerous, not like I was a stepping stone, just like a man. The doubt didn't leave entirely, it never did, but for the first time in years, I wanted to believe in something again. Mary cornered Laura near the garden terrace after the banquet's second course was served. The guests were still inside murmuring about the roses, the helicopter, the elegance, the scandal. But Mary couldn't wait anymore, not after seeing how Laura had taken control of the room with a single entrance and a single smile. "You're just a prop for his temper," Mary hissed, voice low and tight. "He doesn't love you, he's using you to get back at us." Laura turned slowly in her chair, the hem of her dress grazing polished marble. Her expression didn't flicker, not with irritation, not with recognition. "Who are you again?" she asked, her smile faint and glacial. Mary's lips parted, but no sound came out. Laura didn't wait, she simply turned away and wheeled herself back toward the main hall, her posture straight, her control effortless. Mary's heart pounded. She reached into her clutch with shaking fingers and checked her phone. Several unread messages lit up her screen, group texts, notifications, buzzed voicemails. Her thumb hovered, then opened the most recent one. From a friend on the guest list. "You should have stayed at the table, look what you missed." Attached, 3 photos. David, standing beside Laura, his hand resting gently on hers. David, smiling, not the forced expression he wore for cameras, but real, relaxed, soft around the eyes. One photo caught them mid-conversation, both laughing at something only they understood. hand in hand, synchronized. Mary's throat closed. Her fingers trembled. She tapped back to the group chat, messages flying too fast to read. Words like power couple, real love, Laura won him, Mary who? A cold pit formed in her stomach. Then Elise came running. George is missing again. Mary's heart dropped. What? Sarah came in behind her, already typing on her phone. He said he was going out for a breath of air. That was 20 minutes ago. He had told that. St replied since. Did David leave too? Mary asked, voice sharp. Sarah shook her head. No, he's still inside. I saw him a few minutes ago talking to the CEO of Elmhurst Capital. Mary's fingers clenched tightly around her phone. Something didn't feel right. Without a word, she turned and stormed into the house, cutting through the banquet crowd toward the security wing. Staff stepped aside without question. She was still Mary Hale, after all, still a resident of the estate. She entered the security office and shut the door behind her. The technician glanced up. Miss Mary? Pull up the West Side footage from tonight, she ordered. Start 20 minutes ago. I need to know if George actually walked out. The man hesitated, then pulled it up. Mary watched as the cameras played. No sign of David near George, no interaction. George had left through the garden, alone. She narrowed her eyes. Now go back, a week ago, the night George said David pushed him. The tech obeyed, the screen flickered, the timestamp appeared. Mary leaned in. The footage showed George standing at the top of the staircase, alone, pacing. Then, he threw himself down the steps. She blinked, her pulse raced. Pause, go back, play again. The same. His legs tensed, his face grimaced on cue, a deliberate fall. Her mouth went dry. 2 weeks ago, she whispered, when he said David tried to break his arm in the garage. The tape played. George, alone again. He positioned his arm under the edge of the car door and slammed it, himself. He writhed for a moment, then pulled out his phone. Mary stared at the screen, unable to move. Next one, she said hoarsely. 3 months ago, the bruises, the black eye. More footage, more lies. George pacing in his room, George hitting his cheek with the corner of the dresser, George slapping himself in the mirror until blood appeared. Mary staggered back a step. Al? Oh, this time, she whispered. He told us. The technician looked nervous. Do you want me to report this to Mr. Hale? She shook her head slowly, then turned and walked out in silence. Her heels echoed down the marble hall, her fingers twitched against her sides, her mind was a storm of memories, every time she'd shouted at David, every time she'd believed George, every time she'd demanded an apology, slapped him, humiliated him. She remembered David standing alone on the terrace after her first rejection. How he hadn't defended himself when George cried, how he'd bowed his head and taken the blame, over and over again. She walked to the nearest wall, rested her hand against the cool surface, then clenched her fist and punched it hard. The pain snapped her back into her body. She pressed her forehead against the wall and whispered through gritted teeth, all those years, we destroyed him ourselves. The aisle was glass, clear, reflective, floating above a pool of orchid petals and soft white mist that curled beneath our feet. Gold-trimmed arches lined the open-air venue, each one dressed in trailing wisteria, flickering with candlelight despite the morning sun. Hundreds of guests filled the seats, every face turned toward me as I stood at the end of the aisle, waiting. My hands were steady, my jaw relaxed, my pulse even. It was my wedding day. Laura would arrive at any moment. A rustle behind me, a whisper, then a tremor through the crowd. I turned slowly. At the far gate stood 3 familiar silhouettes. Mary, Sarah, George. They weren't dressed for celebration. Mary's dress was crumpled and plain, her hair pulled back like she hadn't slept. Sarah looked worse, cheeks hollow, makeup barely covering the tension in her expression. And George, he looked like a shadow of the boy who once wept at my feet, thinner, slower, cheap suit wrinkled at the knees. His eyes darted over the security guards as if deciding whether to run or fall apart. I didn't move. Don't marry her, George called out, stepping forward past the barrier. David, listen to me, she's using you, you don't know her like we do. The guards stiffened. I shook my head once, they froze, letting the scene play. She doesn't love you, George continued, voice trembling with desperation. You're making a mistake. I know I'm nobody, but I've been trying to protect them, from her, from you. You'll regret this. Enough. My voice cut through the air like a blade. George stopped mid-step, his lip quivered. She'll ruin you. Mary took his arm and pulled him back. Her touch wasn't gentle this time, it was control, not comfort. She stepped forward herself, just to the edge of the aisle. The guests murmured behind their veils and fans, shifting in their chairs, pretending not to stare while listening intently. Eri looked up at me. Her expression wasn't proud anymore, just tired, and something like hope flickering beneath the exhaustion. I was wrong, she whispered. I should have chosen you. A pause. You still love me, right? Her voice caught, a tremble in her breath. The wind stirred the petals at my feet. I looked at her the way I once wished she'd look at me, and I said, "Who told you I ever loved you?" A collective inhale from the audience, a silent shattering behind her eyes. Before she could reply, the music changed. The main gates opened, and Laura arrived, but not in a wheelchair. She walked. Heel after deliberate heel, step after step, she walked down the glass aisle in a gown of ivory silk, a crown of diamonds woven through her dark hair, 2 flower girls flanking her, scattering golden petals with each step. Gasps erupted, phones snapped. Even the officiant blinked twice. Laura met my eyes and didn't break her gaze once, no cane, no brace, nothing but poise and power. Mary staggered back a step. Laura reached the altar and gently handed me a sleek black folder. I opened it, signed documents, transfer of assets, every share, every estate, every portion of the Wyndham fortune, handed to me, unconditionally. I told you, she said softly, turning to the crowd. There is nothing I won't give this man, not even everything I own. The audience erupted in applause. George dropped to his knees behind the guests, burying his face in his hands. Sarah closed her eyes, jaw clenched tight. Mary, still, tried one last time. She stepped toward us, voice shaking. David, think of the child we could have. The room froze. Laura turned. Heirs? She echoed, a glint in her eye. She reached behind the podium and gestured. 2 small children stepped out from the side aisle, 1 boy, 1 girl, dressed in matching white and gold. The girl had Laura's eyes, the boy had my jaw. They're already here, she said. The gasp became a roar. Laura took my hand and smiled gently. I was never infertile, and I haven't needed a wheelchair in 2 years. Silence, shattered. Mary's face collapsed in disbelief. George looked up, his mouth open, no sound. Sarah whispered, "It was all real?" Laura stepped to the podium. I protected my body, I protected my future, and I chose the man who never needed to be fooled to be kind. She took my hand again and said nothing else. The officiant finally found his voice. Shall we proceed? I didn't look back. Not once. 3 years passed like the closing of a storm, quiet, slow, and strangely clean. What had once felt unbearable, humiliation, betrayal, silence, no longer lingered in the walls of Hale Estate. The shadows that used to cling to every hallway were gone, replaced by light. The curse of the Hale bloodline had ended, not through prayer, not through desperation, but through choice, my choice. Laura gave birth to twins on a morning soaked in rain and sunlight. A boy first, then a girl. They didn't cry much, just blinked up at the world like they already knew they belonged to it. The doctors marveled. My father wept, not because of emotion, but because the line wouldn't end with me. Because for the first time in 18 generations, the Hale name had more than one heir. A future that didn't have to balance on a single life. We named the boy Leo, the girl, Liana. Laura raised them with quiet strength. She didn't hover, she didn't perform, she simply loved them with a consistency that healed me by extension. Where I'd once flinched at softness, I now welcomed it, slowly, carefully, like learning a new language I'd only ever heard whispered through glass. The company expanded under my hand. Deals that had once slipped through our grasp were now standard wins. Competitors who once watched for my fall began to call for alliances. I sat at the helm of an empire my grandfather could only dream of, no longer needing approval from the ghosts of my lineage. My father retired 6 months after the twins were born. He still walks the estate, mostly in the rose garden, muttering about stock prices and legacy, but he no longer interferes. He nods when he sees Laura, smiles when the children run to him. I think, in his own quiet way, he's at peace. And the others? Mary lives in a rundown corner of Lyon. I know because my legal team once intercepted an unauthorized attempt to sell off one of the Hale patents under her name. She tried to start a skincare brand with Sarah, something natural, I was told. It failed within 6 months. Investors pulled out when the numbers didn't add up. They packed what little they had left and disappeared. George didn't leave with them. 2 years ago, he was struck by a delivery van on the edge of a village road. Nothing fatal, but enough. The damage to his spine left him partially paralyzed. Now he lives in a low-income suburb with a woman who throws plates when he raises his voice. They say he doesn't speak much anymore. Every year on my birthday, I still receive something. A small envelope, no return address. Inside, a card, a simple happy birthday in the same clean, slanted script I once memorized as a teenager. Mary. I never respond. The envelope always ends up in the fire, not out of anger, just silence. I no longer live in the past she built around me. This morning, the twins ran barefoot across the back lawn, chasing each other beneath the lemon trees. Leo held a makeshift paper crown, shouting about kingdoms. Liana laughed, louder than anyone else I've ever known, her hair tangled in gold light. I sat beneath the arbor, a report open on my lap, but unread. Then I felt her. Laura stepped out from the house, bathed in the golden hour, her hair tied back, soft strands escaping to frame her face. She carried a tray of tea, one hand on her hip, smile already forming before she even reached me. She set the tray down without a word and sat beside me, her eyes following the children, her fingers slipping gently into mine. Neither of us spoke. There was no need. I looked at her, truly looked, and felt the quiet warmth of something I never believed I would hold. Home, family, peace. And for the first time since I was a boy, I smiled without caution, without calculation. This is what family feels like.